Okay, so the recorder is on, and just to begin, I'll state for the record that my name is Ben Bauman, and I'm here with Eugene Henry Lamkin Jr., who goes by Ned Lamkin, and today's date is January 28th, 2020, and we are in Mr. Lamkin's home in Indianapolis, Indiana. So to start, if you could begin by telling me when and where were you born?
I was born in 1935. Do you need a date?
Sure.
February 23rd, 1935, in Owensboro, Kentucky.
And what were your parents' names?
Eugene Henry Sr. and Nancy Elizabeth Davidson Lamkin.
Okay. And where is your family from originally? Is it Kentucky as well?
Yes. I don't know much beyond Kentucky. I wish I did. My grandmother was a McCoy, and we've always wondered whether she was one of the Hatfields and McCoys.
Oh, okay.
And we've not been able to establish whether that is in fact the case or not the case.
Sure.
She does remember when the railroads came through that they bundled up the children and the women and took them away from all these foreigners.
Oh, wow.
So it goes back a ways, but beyond that, I don't know the origins.
Interesting. And
I think we're Scottish, however.
Scottish, okay.
The name Lamkin, as I understand it, is short for Lambert, which is a branch of the Lamont clan. And my mother was a Davidson, which is the Davidson clan in Scotland. And when I did a genealogic saliva test, it said I was Scandinavian and British Isles, which would be perfect for Scotland because Scotland was populated heavily by the people from Norway.
True. Okay. Interesting. And so, how did you find yourself in Indiana?
Well, I found myself there as an infant.
Okay.
So I didn't find myself at all. I just was there.
Sure.
Do you want my father's story?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Well, my father raised on a farm and got one semester of college, and then the tough times came and he didn't feel he could go on. He needed to be at the farm, so he left, and then he came to the farm, and to raise some money, he cut hair in a little town nearby, and then he went to Louisville to get a job and worked on the dam over the Ohio River, and then went up to an office for another job, and it turned out he went to the wrong office, but they hired him anyway, and it was a tariff company. And so he worked with them for a while, and then he went with a school book company and sold school books in Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. He sold all of the equipment at the original Jordan Hall at Butler University.
Wow.
Lived in Peoria, Illinois, until the Depression. And the Depression came along, and his company went bankrupt, and he needed a job, and he had gotten acquainted somehow or another with the founders of Mayflower Transit Company here in Indianapolis, and they offered him a job here, helping them recruit agencies around the country. So that's when we moved to Indianapolis.
Okay.
And he and my mother spent, I think, 2 years during the Depression living out of a car, going from place to place around the country to get agents. And then he did, and he became the executive secretary for the Mayflower Warehousemen's Association. Then went to Akron, Ohio as the vice president of Cotter Van Lines, and Mr. Cotter decided not to retire after all, so he came back to Indianapolis, and I was with him now at all of these times, and became the sales chief executive for Mayflower until he retired.
Wow.
No, not until he retired. He had a dispute with Mayflower over their ethics, so he left, and the agents, which loved him, all bought out his stock at considerably more than its face value, so that he could leave the company because he just would not give in to what he thought was inappropriate behavior. And then he went with Wheaton Van Line and was with Wheaton until he retired.
Interesting.
So that's how we got into Indianapolis.
Yeah, okay. And what was your mother doing at this time?
My mother was a graduate of the University of Kentucky. She majored in Romance languages, was a Romance language teacher until she married my dad in Kentucky, and then stayed with him and basically supported him in the travels. So there's no way she could work while they were traveling.
Right.
When she came back, she became a full-time mother here for my sister and myself in Indianapolis, and was on all kinds of women's organizations and was an officer in a lot of them.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I've always thought that my mother and my sister both could have been executives in something, but for the fact that women couldn't do that at during their periods of time. They're very bright, very able people.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. And you mentioned you had a sister. What's your sister's name?
Nancy Jane.
Is she older or younger?
She's 19 months younger.
Oh, okay. All right.
So we grew up very close.
Yeah. So how would you describe your childhood growing up?
Amazingly free, supported, and exposed to good values. When I look at the world today and I see people who treat people badly and are so self-centered, I think the reason why we're different and think differently must have a lot to do with the way we were raised. It's a very loving, very secure, very safe environment, but also we were allowed a lot of freedom. Mm-hmm. And we would go down the street or visit with people, and our mother would just expect us home for lunch or home for supper, and didn't worry a whole lot about it. And all the parents in the area looked out for the kids who were at their houses. Right. Which is very different, I think, than it is today. As a teenager, prior to high school, I guess late before preteen and teenage, I would get on my bike and ride a half mile away to a ballpark, meet a bunch of other kids, and we'd toss a bat to decide who was going to be on what sides, and we'd have a baseball game. Yeah. I don't know that anything happens like that now. And we during the war, a friend and I used to build out of planks and blankets and whatever was available, airplanes or PT boats or something, to be like a part of what was going on, and that stimulus to imagination and visionary kinds of thinking, I think, have a lot to do with who I became. Sure. Because I wasn't channeled in any direction. There was a huge opportunity to think up things and make up our own play. Which I again think is lacking for a lot of young people growing up today. They're too regimented. They're focused into, if they seem to like basketball, they're put into a basketball league. If they seem to like something else, they're put into that, or they're into a program at school for something after school. And in high school, I think after school activities are extremely important. But when you're younger, you need to explore yourself and your environment and your opportunities and use your imagination. I'm not sure that our AI society is quite as open for that.
Yeah, things definitely evolved over time, yeah. Okay, so who was the most influential people in your childhood?
My parents.
Your parents, okay.
And a couple of uncles. Mm-hmm. All of my uncles were very important in my life, but I had two particularly. My mother's oldest brother, and I remember a lot of things with him, but I don't remember specific conversations, except one, and I remember this very clearly when he said to me, "Never do anything in private that you would be afraid for the whole world to know," which I thought was really good and has stayed with me. Yeah. And another uncle, in Kentucky was kind of like a second dad in a way, because I remember a lot of time with him. I campaigned with him in Kentucky when he ran for lieutenant governor. Another time, he and I took a tour of eastern and southeastern Kentucky to see the Capitol and some of the Kentucky Heritage and Berea College, and so they were very influential people as well, and teachers. I mean, I was enormously lucky. I don't remember my teachers 2 years in Akron, Ohio at all, but the teachers in Indianapolis I remember almost every year vividly. They were just so stimulating and exciting and supportive. I'm really, really very, very lucky.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know that kids all have that today. Same thing in high school. Just
interesting.
Very supportive.
In terms of your family's background, did you have any sort of knowledge about your family's political beliefs as a child, or?
No, not particularly. My dad had been a Democrat because everybody in his part of Kentucky was at the time, and then he became a Republican. I knew that. Well, I remember once in, I guess it was 1940, he and I walking to the bus together and talking about the Wilkie versus, I think it was 40, Wilkie versus Roosevelt campaign, and I remember he was a supporter of Wilkie. And then I remember reading Wilkie's book One World not long thereafter, and I was fairly young when that was all going on. But I do remember that. So that's about the only. But the thing that was most formative to me had nothing to do with friends or anything else. It had to do with the war.
Sure, of course.
I mean, I remember the chair I was sitting in and exactly where I was, listening to Roosevelt announce that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And I read in the paper all of the battles. I remember after the war wondering what in the world they'd write about in the newspaper.
Sure. With
the war over.
Yeah, I bet.
And seeing all of the people coming out of the concentration camps, and being aware of the dropping of the atomic bomb. And I had, for a couple of years thereafter, nightmares about the atomic bomb. So the war was enormously important, and we were all part of it.
Yeah.
My mother was a block captain. She checked during air raid drills to make sure all the lights were out, and that the block was pinned down. And we, as kids, we went door to door collecting metal and paper and other stuff to contribute to the war effort.
Yeah.
So we've not been like that since as a country.
Sure.
I mean, everybody in this country was at war.
Yeah.
And the women were in the airplanes and in the factories, and the men were over fighting, and the kids were out doing what they could do. And and I remember a young man across the street working out at home to get ready to take off to be a Marine. And I remember both blue stars and gold stars in windows.
Wow.
Those things are terribly formative. And they gave you a real outward view of the world and a concern for the world.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. Wow. So moving on towards your education, what schools did you attend as a child and a teenager?
Well, as a child, I went to School 84, which is now a center of inquiry. Was an outstanding school. I went to the Rankin School for 2 years in Akron. Can't tell you much more about it than that.
Yeah.
The thing I remember most about Akron was being in Cub Scouts there.
Okay.
And then back in Indianapolis, came back to 84 and graduated from there and went to Broad Ripple. And then went from Broad Ripple, thought I would just probably go to IU. I had no idea that there were other options. And on college night, a friend of mine said, for the second hour, you don't have a place to go, come with me to the DePaul thing. So I went with him to the DePaul evening and ended up going to DePaul for college and IU Medical School and interned in Philadelphia and then came back for my residency in Indiana.
Right. Okay. And how would you describe your educational experiences overall?
Excellent. It was interesting to me. I did well at DePaul, but I wasn't, I figured that when I went to medical school, boy, that's where all of the really bright people would be.
Right.
I was surrounded by more inquisitive and intelligent people at DePaul than I was in medical school.
Interesting.
In fact, I carried a couple young men through the first year of medical school.
Yeah.
So that was a little disappointing to me.
Sure.
But that didn't decrease my interest in medicine. And the reason I went into medicine was because I took a test when I was at DePaul saying, what should I be? And it said you should be a doctor, a lawyer, or a preacher.
Oh, wow.
And I had gone as a pre-theo.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured, well, it's a lot easier to get out of medicine and into one of those others than it is to get out of one of those others and into medicine. So I'll start in medicine.
Okay.
And I just never got out.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. And did you have any extracurricular activities either in high school or college that you took part in?
My main extracurricular activity has always been vocal. I'm a singer.
Okay. Wow.
And I started singing in grade school. I actually got invited to come down to a couple luncheon clubs and sing for men. And went to Broad Ripple and became a part of the Reelite choral group my freshman year. Was in all of the student and formal productions. Vocally, joined the Thespians, was a founding member of the Thespian Club. When I was a freshman, I played baseball. As a sophomore, I went out for practice, and he said we were going to have practice through spring vacation. I said, to hell with that.
Yeah.
So I dropped sports at that point. But my junior year, I decided to go out for basketball.
Oh, okay.
Well, the baseball coach was the basketball
coach.
So I didn't last but about a week.
Yeah, I'm sure that's rough.
Basketball. And then my junior year, I also went out for football and played reserve football. And then my senior year, starting that late, my football coach at the end of summer practice came to me and he said, you can stay on the team if you want to, but I can't guarantee you'll get a letter. And I said, well, I'll stay. And the choral people said, you can play football or you can have a lead in the operetta, but you can't do both.
Ooh.
So I went into the chorus of the operetta and then played football and did get my letter in football.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So those are primarily my extra.
Yeah.
Well, I was also on the Oratorical Society, so we gave speeches around the speaking contests.
Right.
And I also went to Culver Academy in the summers for 3 summers, and I graduated there as the commander of the Naval Battalion.
Wow.
And sang in the choir at Culver and ran track at Culver. And was on the rowing team, and I boxed.
Wow. Okay.
I boxed until a fight when my mouthpiece fell out, and I looked down at the canvas for my mouthpiece, and I got hit on the side of the head so hard while I was looking down that I said, I don't want to do this anymore. So that was the end of my boxing career. But that's my athletic history.
Interesting.
Except in the service. In Korea, I did play with an officers' basketball team, and we won the Corps championship. I averaged 14 points a game, and it had a high game of 26.
Wow.
So that proved to me I could have played basketball.
Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, that's my athletic career.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Okay, neat. And so during your academic career, did you have any favorite subjects in school?
I really liked philosophy.
Philosophy, okay.
I had basically a minor in philosophy. I majored in pre-medical science, but
Okay.
but I had a minor and somewhat in government, but more in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
When I was young, and since this is government related, there were a set of records, two sets of records called "I Can Hear It Now" by by Edward R. Murrow, and they were sounds and people's quotes from 1941 to whatever the last year was that they did it. And I listen to those a lot. And I think that's what stimulated my interest in government. And I can still quote Mayor LaGuardia or Winston Churchill or a number of people from those records, just listening to the speeches that they gave. And I can still give those speeches. So when I was in high school, I can't remember what the class was, but we had to write a theme, and I told the teacher I was going to write on a constitutional history of the United States, and she said, "That's a bit broad. Why don't you write on something a little more focused?" So I wrote on Winston Churchill.
Okay, interesting.
I've had an interest in government all of that time.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Okay, wow. And so when you grew up in Indiana, did you have any views about the state of Indiana or what it was like to be a Hoosier or anything like that? Did you have any opinions about that?
Not particularly. I was basically a Kentucky boy in Indiana.
Okay.
And I knew that. I mean, all of my family was still down in Kentucky.
Sure.
And so, the saying at that time was that a Hoosier is just a Kentuckian with shoes on.
Okay.
I had it. Other than that, nope. Well, the slogan in Indianapolis at that time was the largest city in the country not on a navigable body of water.
Sure.
And I did pay attention to that for some reason.
All right. Well, okay. Latched onto something there then. So, in what ways did your awareness of politics change as you got older?
Well, as I said, I had that interest from high school on,
right?
And going into the law was one of the options that I considered in college. When I was in medical school, I did nothing but medicine. I was 24 hours a day. I studied, and the same thing through my internship and residency. But during my internship, I developed more interest, and that was the time of William Buckley and the National Review, and I started following those.
Yeah.
I interned in Philadelphia, but I dated a girl in New York City whose father was the United States delegate to the United Nations.
Oh, wow.
And she and I were part of the group that founded the Conservative Party of New York.
Wow.
Strictly through her.
Yeah.
Dill Judd. Walter Judd was her father.
Interesting.
And so I had an interest there. And then when I came back to Indianapolis, after the service, I didn't know anybody in Indianapolis after being away, and so I joined the ski club, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, a couple others, but one of them was the Young Republicans.
Okay.
And I was disappointed in the Young Republicans because they were strictly a social club.
Okay.
They were not interested in issues or trying to address what was going on. They just got together and drank, and I thought, well, that's a waste of time.
Yeah.
But about that time, we're getting off into politics now a little bit, but about that time, Goldwater was running for president.
Right.
And Ronald Reagan gave his City on a Hill speech, which I listened to, and I was terribly impressed with. And so I put together a card, and I sent a couple hundred postcards to all my Christmas list, urging them to listen to the next time Reagan was going to give that speech, and gave them the time and the network and what have you. And then I took my cards and I went door to door in my apartment project, where I had moved because that was the place they told me all the young people lived, and handing out cards to people and urging them to watch the speech.
Interesting.
And one of the places that I called on was the apartment of Jim Blythe, who's an attorney here in town. But he was freshly married and living in the Jamestown apartments where I was. And he said, "Why don't you join the Republicans for Action?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, we're trying to take over the Republican Party in Marion County because we don't think they've been living up to what they could be." And I said, "Well, you don't want to do that. Let's not fight with one another. Let's just win an election." And he said, "Well, come down to a meeting with me and let us see if we can't convince you that what we're doing is a good thing." So I went to a Young Republicans for Action committee meeting.
Interesting.
And to make a long story short, ended up being the vice president of the Young Republicans for Action for Marion County. And one of our jobs was, we had two jobs. One was I formed a Young Republican club at the IU Medical Center and drafted people there to be part of that club. And then that club's job was to go out and recruit precinct committeemen, or at least identify every committeeman and whether or not they were going to support the Republican Action Committee in the primary. And if they weren't, we said, "We're going to run somebody against you."
Yeah.
Which we did. And so we had to find the people to run against them. And the answer is the Republican Action Committee won the vast majority of committee positions around the county. And in the process of all of that, Bert Servas, who was the head of the city council, came to me and said, "Why don't you run for office?" And I said, "Well, I can't. I don't have time, and I don't have any money." And he said, "Well, if you can find some time, we'll take care of the money." So I agreed to become a candidate for the legislature, and our slate got nominated, and then we got elected. So
wow,
that's how it all happened.
Okay, interesting. So you really were pretty involved before you became officially part of the General Assembly. Quite a background then, and working with a party that.
Well, it's all in about a year.
Yeah, but it's a fair amount you were doing though in that year. It seems like that's amazing. Wow. So I guess my next question is then, you said that you were doing your residency in Philadelphia?
No, my internship.
Oh, your internship.
Just for 1 year, yeah.
Okay. So were you sure at that point that you were coming back to Indianapolis then? Or did you ever have thoughts of...
No. Actually, I went to New York and I auditioned for the Fantasticks.
Wow.
A very good friend from Indianapolis was the narrator in the Fantasticks.
Okay.
He was the second narrator, and he was leaving to go with the road cast of 110 in the Shade, and so they needed a new narrator, and he got me an audition. And the day or maybe 2 days after the audition, I got shipped up by the Army to the Canadian border to take care of summer soldiers, which meant there was no possibility of doing that role. But I gave a lot of thought at that time to staying in New York and doing music, because I loved to sing, and I'd sung opera and Broadway, and then I said, no, there've got to be at least 80 people in New York with the same talent, the same opportunities, same everything that I've got. I hate those odds, So I said, no, I'll go back to Indiana.
Interesting.
Internal medicine.
Okay. Wow. And when you came back to Indianapolis and you're getting involved in politics there, how did your politics align with your families? Did it alter a bit, or was it pretty much the same, or?
Oh, I think pretty much the same.
Okay.
To use the word Republican in today's world would not apply to us.
Right.
We believed in free markets. We believed in opportunity for everybody. We believed that government had a role to play. It was just appropriate to get the balance between
Sure.
the government involvement in it or government staying out of it. And really what you would call today a moderate, I guess, or middle of the road. We were, I think, socially very liberal and economically very conservative.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the same throughout our family.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here.
But don't call me a Republican today.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, no problem.
When John Ruckelshaus considered running for Congress, I sent him a note and I said, I'm not sending another Republican to Washington.
Yeah.
I'll support you if you want to stay in Indiana because you're valuable here.
Yeah.
But you're going to run for Congress, I'll be working against you.
Wow, okay, interesting. So, talking about your immediate family now, when, if at all, did you get married?
Oh, not until, I came close a couple times, but not until 1968. In May of 1967, the girl I was dating and had been dating for a good while needed a roommate. And a mutual friend told her about a gal who needed an apartment to stay, who just moved back to Indianapolis from Terre Haute, where she'd been teaching, to go to IUPUI Law School.
Yeah.
And that was the person that's now my wife. And that just happened until August. In August, she called me on the phone and said, I understand your dad is in the moving business. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm moving to California. Can you help me get moved? And I said, anything we can do to get a good-looking gal out of town, I certainly want to help. And why don't we have lunch and talk about it? So we met on the far south side because too many people knew me and they knew the gal I was dating, and had lunch and talked about it, and that was it. And she took off and went to California, and I went back to dating the gal I'd been dating all the time.
Okay.
But Harry Gonzo and John Eisenbarger decided to take IU to the Rose Bowl. And as a legislator, I got 4 tickets to the Rose Bowl if I wanted them. So I called her and I said, I have these 4 tickets. You want to go to the Rose Bowl? And I had a friend in Seattle who I invited to come down and join us. And she said, yeah, do you need a place to stay? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, you can stay at my place. And I've got a couch. And so I stayed with her, and we went to the Rose Bowl, had a very nice weekend, and it came time to go back. And the airplane said, we're full. We need somebody to volunteer to take a later flight. So I said, I will. So I stayed another day, called my office, said, cancel all my patients for Monday. I'll be back a day late. And we then communicated regularly and on the phone. And I invited her to meet me in Florida to see my parents over her spring vacation, which she did. And we were married in August.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. Yeah.
And 52 years ago.
Quite a story. Wow. And what's your wife's name?
Martha.
Martha. Okay. Interesting. And do you have any children?
Yes, I have a boy and a girl. The girl was first. She's, I'm not going to give ages, I guess, but she was doing extremely well at Hewlett-Packard, had a national responsibility, met a guy at Hewlett-Packard, and married him, and then got pregnant and they gave her a year's sabbatical for her pregnancy. And at the end of the year, they said, when are you coming back? She said, I'm not coming back. So she's been a full-time mother. Now her kids are about to empty nest her, and she's looking for work opportunities.
Yeah. My
son was a couple years later, and he's now he had a really interesting career. He went to Princeton, went to Park Tudor, and then went to Princeton, and came back here, and was an advanced person for Steve Goldsmith when Steve was running for governor, and then decided to go to law school, and went to Northwestern Law School. Came back and got a job with Baker and Daniels, and didn't enjoy advocating for people who he thought were wrong. You know, and our system does that. You know,
Okay.
no matter how bad you are, you're entitled to full
Sure.
representation, and he was not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So he started auditing a class in ethics at Butler, or maybe IUPUI, I can't remember which, and liked it so well that he decided to get a master's in biomedical ethics
Wow.
at the University of Minnesota. So by that time he had a family, but they sold their house, moved into a little rental, and he commuted for 2 years to Minneapolis every week, up and back, until he got a master's in biomedical ethics. Then he applied for and got a clerkship with a federal judge in Portland, Oregon. Did that for a year, but loved it. Came back and decided he didn't want to go back to practice, so he got a fellowship at Stanford in biomedical ethics, and did that for a year or two, and is now a tenured professor of law at the University of Tulsa.
Wow. Okay. It's a pretty successful family then. Eh? That's great.
They're good kids.
And what are your kids' names?
Matthew is the boy, and Melinda,
Okay.
who goes by Mandy, and that's because I didn't know that Mandy is not short for Melinda, it's short for Amanda, but I didn't know any better. And so when she was born, somehow or another in my head, the Mandy, there's a minister handy, the song came to me while I was in the hall at the hospital. So I said, well, let's call her Mandy.
Yeah.
And then we needed a full name, so we said we picked Melinda. That's out of pure ignorance, because we wanted to call her Mandy. So she's Melinda.
Yeah.
But we call her Mandy.
Okay, well, whatever works.
It does work.
And how did your family influence your career? And maybe did they have any influence on your politics?
Well, I think I knew my dad was a Reformed Democrat, Republican.
Right.
As I mentioned, the Wilkie thing, but not a lot. I don't remember a lot of discussion of politics, but my mother was very civically involved. She was a court watcher. It went to visit and watch the court proceedings so that they could take positions. She was in a lot of women's organizations. She was and an officer in a number of those. So external orientation came, I think, very much from my mother.
Okay. And did your career at all have an impact on your children, or was it hard to have the balance?
You'd have
to ask them.
You'd have to ask them.
That's fair. Yeah.
It did not take me away from them.
Yeah.
I coached both of them.
Okay.
My daughter in softball and my son in softball and basketball. Went to all of their performances for everything. So I don't think I shorted them. Whether I gave them as much time and direction as I should have, I'll never know.
Yeah.
I've always said I may not have been the best parent in the world, but by George, they're great kids.
Yeah.
So we must have done something right.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah. That's good. Let's see. So, as you initially became involved in politics, what were the key issues or legislation that you championed or fought against?
Well, there wasn't a specific legislative motivation for getting active in politics, and I didn't start with any specific legislative goals.
Yeah.
But after our first session, we started meeting to discuss issues affecting Marion County.
Yeah.
And we decided that we needed two things. Number one is we needed a state university, and number two is we needed to reorganize government for Marion County.
Right.
And so we had a series of meetings, and that's when we formed Unigov and passed that the next year. And got Lou Green as the new mayor and reorganized the council.
Right.
Just it was an important thing to do. The Democrats that preceded us in '65 had tried to give the mayor responsibility for units that had countywide jurisdiction, but they didn't provide any voting privileges to the people who were then going to be contributing to and under the jurisdiction of those agencies that were countywide agencies, but run by the mayor whom they didn't elect.
Interesting.
And so we said that's not the right approach, So we decided that we needed to expand the mayor, but we needed to provide representative government throughout the area and consolidate some of the agencies to the extent that we could. We didn't do anything about schools as much as we recognized the problem with schools, because we could not have passed the bill if we'd had put schools in it.
Right.
We had some opposition from some of the far right people. I got threats on the phone. So there wasn't unanimous support for it, but our precinct organization was totally supportive, and the mayor, turns out, was a really good mayor and took care of what people were interested in. In the bill, there were two parts of the bill that I was interested and concerned with. One was one of our senators had been persuaded that we had to put a restriction in the bill to limit the borders of the new Unigov to the county line and not allow annexation outside of the county line. This is the only city in the state of Indiana that is so restricted.
Yeah.
And that has proved to be a disaster. I opposed it at the time. The delegation was convinced that by the senator that if they didn't put that in, we wouldn't get any votes from the Republicans in the surrounding counties. And so we put it in, and we didn't get any votes from any of the Republicans in any of the surrounding counties, despite that.
Wow.
So it still sticks in my craw
Yeah.
badly, because if you look at what's happened now, the problems that we were trying to address of an urban core and suburbs that took advantage of the urban core but had nothing to do with it, that's happening all over again. That all of the Avons and Brownsburgs and Fishers and Zionsvilles and what have you would not be what they are without the city of Indianapolis. And yet they contribute nothing to the city of Indianapolis. They come in and work, but they don't pay for the streets they ride on into work. They contribute nothing to the budget. And you remember that cities or local government generally is terribly dependent primarily on the property tax. Well,
Right.
the property tax is frozen, which limits your ability to add services. And at the same time, in Marion County, we have enormous amounts of property that's tax exempt, whether it's the hospitals or the government or agencies or the rest of it,
Yeah.
off of which we get nothing. So what's left after you subtract all of the property that's not taxable has to support everything that's going on, including all the roads that people are using to come in from the surrounding counties.
Yeah.
So that's been a problem that I think we could have avoided, and we didn't, and that sticks in my craw. The other one is that I thought if we were going to expand the government to a broader area, we needed to provide true local options to smaller communities within the area, which we did a little bit because we had what we called included and excluded towns in the Unigov bill. And the included towns are places like Williams Creek, where they can have their own little constable if they want. And there are things that they can do locally. And then there are excluded towns which had mayors and city councils and were responsible for their streets, like Speedway and Lawrence and Beech Grove. So there was some local stuff, but my approach was to what I called Minigov, which allowed local areas, neighborhoods, if you will, to organize. Part of the problem was that you'd have a city council meeting or a progress committee meeting, and these people would come in and say, I represent all these people on the south side. Nobody ever elected them, They just decided to be the leader of all these people who may or may not agree with them.
Yeah.
But they nevertheless represented themselves in that way. And I said, no, we ought to formalize that process. So that there's a way that these smaller areas can organize and have an election process and give them some local authority. So if Mrs. So-and-so is teaching piano lessons, she can reserve parking areas outside of her house.
Right.
Or if so-and-so is blind, there are certain things that we can allow the local community to do to make life better for that person. And we passed that finally, and I don't think that's in there in your list. But the party convinced me to put a provision in it that would have to be activated by a motion of the city county council, and the city county council never implemented it.
Oh wow! Okay.
Which I thought was dumb on their part. I said, if I were a city councilman and you gave me this, I'd never be defeated again. I'd work with those people so closely that there would be no question about who their representative was on the council, but they didn't do it.
Interesting.
So those were the two parts of Unigov that I accepted, but the rest of it I was totally for.
Yeah.
And I carried it in the House.
Okay. So it sounds like the connection between Minigov and Unigov and the parts of it that you were really pushing for was just to sort of help balance it out.
Right.
So you weren't leaving out a certain aspect that could cause other issues later.
It was the two issues that I thought were missing.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to the schools, and clearly schools were a big issue, and we've been criticized a lot for not handling the schools.
Right.
There is no way we could have passed that bill. Zero opportunity to pass the bill if we had touched schools.
Sure.
So you do what you can do. That's part of the political process.
Yes. Yeah.
Politics is the art of the possible.
Right.
It's not the art of the ideal. It can't be. And that's part of our Washington politics today. Is that we're a divided country because there are people who have their own ideal, and they don't like the other person's ideal, and they won't talk to each other about what can we do that satisfies both of us.
Sure. And so, because you were so involved in Unigov, it has to be really useful for people eventually listening to this. Who are the main proponents of Unigov, and who are the main sort of opponents of Unigov?
Well, the main proponents were the Republicans who had organized countywide and wanted to create a better form of government. And Dick Lugar was our leader. Bert Servas at the council was also a leader. John Burkhart was a tremendous supporter. He was the head of College Life Insurance Company, founder and president of College Life Insurance. And we had our meetings at his house to develop this program. There's actually a play.
That's right. I heard about that.
Right now about all of that. So those were the main proponents, and we got other people to endorse it. I can't tell you now who all the people were that actually endorsed Unigov. The opponents were, number one, the Democrats, because they saw this as making it harder and harder to elect a mayor, which is in fact the case. I can't argue that it did make it harder for them. We had a big public hearing one night in the House chamber, and I ran into Jim Beatty, who was the Democrat chairman at that time, and I said, Jim, we really need to do this. And he said, I know, but we're just going to make you bleed all we can in the process. So there was that opposition, and then there were a few people who called it unnecessary government interference in the world, and saw it as the far right people who seeing everything as a conspiracy to do them in. And there were some of those people within the Republican Party. So it was the Democrats in a formal kind of way.
Right.
But I'm not sure, I don't remember whether we got any Democrat votes or not, but the two people who came back to congratulate me after we passed it, the first two people who came back were Democrats.
Interesting.
Because it was good government. I mean, that's all we were interested in, was doing what we thought was good government. It did have a political implication. I can't argue that. But the Democrats are back now. They run the city, so it works just fine in the long run.
And so, how would you describe your main role in Unigov? Were you someone that was really big in formulating the idea, or were you more just trying to help make sure it's right?
I was active from the origin on.
Okay, interesting. And I guess just to clarify, since not everyone's being necessarily familiar with all the aspects of Unigov and its complexities, could you just break down the most important aspects as to why Unigov was necessary?
Well, because you had people who were, you had a government that didn't function. There was the League of Women Voters had issued a little booklet, a pamphlet, preceding the time that we were even elected. And the title of their pamphlet was, "Who's in charge here?"
Right.
And the answer was nobody. We had unaccountable boards running these various components of government, and the boards were put together by appointment. One person making an appointment might be the circuit court judge, somebody else might be the city council, somebody else might be the mayors, or other people, and there was no accountability for any of these organizations, and yet they had taxing authority and administrative authority over the entire county, and the mayor had no say. I mean, we elected the mayor, but he had no say over any of those organizations. They were always all independent of his activity.
Sure.
So we said that's structurally inappropriate, and it just doesn't work, and it didn't work. And so we tried to put it into some sort of a functional relationship with a representative body that was elected from the general population, and the mayor was elected countywide, so everybody got a vote.
Yeah. Okay.
It was simply it was really a good government motivation.
Yeah.
And the University of Indianapolis, which we tried very hard to create, was also a goal for the city. That Lugar's position was, you can't have a great city without a great university, and we got co-opted by that. We wanted to create a University of Indianapolis where IUPUI is now. Ended up not being able to get that done, so we ended up with IUPUI, which we did do. Wanted to call it the University of Indianapolis, but the president of the University of Indiana Central University, which is now the University of Indianapolis, had gone a couple of years earlier into the county clerk's office, the Secretary of State's office, and said, "What does it cost to reserve a name?" And she said, $5. He said, "Fine, here's $10. I want the University of Indianapolis and Indianapolis University." So he had them both in his pocket. We didn't know that.
Wow.
And then at some point, he announced that Indiana Central was going to become University of Indianapolis. We had gotten IUPUI put together, but we lost the University of Indianapolis. But IUPUI in its own right now is a recognized and successful university. It's bigger than the University of Washington, the University of Kentucky, a number of major universities around the country are smaller than IUPUI is.
Yeah.
And some of their graduate schools are very well recognized. So it's been a boon for the city, I think, to have that institution. Isn't quite what we had envisioned, but it's still a positive.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And in terms of the legacy of Unigov, what would you say are the biggest successes of Unigov that can be seen today in the modern context?
Oh, I think all of the development that's occurred, the investment, and I have no idea what the dollar investment has been since 1967 in central Indianapolis, but it's enormous. I mean, as somebody said back at the time, after 8 o'clock at night, you could shoot a rifle down Washington Street and never hit anything. You know, it's just the city was dead at night. Yeah. And now we've got major sports and entertainment facilities and restaurants, and businesses have located there. You know, things. Major corporations are now represented. Cummins decided to move up to Indianapolis, even though they still say their headquarters is in Columbus. It isn't. It's up here. So things like that have all of that has happened, and I don't think it would have happened had it not been for Unigov. Yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting. Let's see. Going back to, we're jumping around a little bit. Going back to the beginning of your political career. When you first started running to be part of the General Assembly, what did your campaign emphasize most?
I don't remember. I think my area was public safety.
Mm-hmm.
We at that time there were 11 of us in the House that ran as a group, and I can't remember the exact number. I think 8 senators ran as a group at large from Marion County. And so we divided ourselves, Senate and House together. We were all part of the same group, into study committees and issue-oriented committees. And each committee had an area that it was to look at. And I think mine was, as I recall, public safety and public health. And so that was my main thrust when I went. And one of the things which I passed and was later rescinded was vehicle inspection, because we had a lot of people who were dying on the highways, and I thought, is it something we can do to reduce that? Making sure that the cars are safe that they're driving in. And it functioned for about 2 years, and then some senator came in and repealed it.
Oh, okay.
And he was right,
Okay.
and particularly because since that time, and not very long after that, the quality of vehicles on the road has increased enormously.
Right.
From a safety standpoint, from all of the cars don't break down the way they did. I mean, you don't see people with burned out headlights nearly as often as you used to, rattling down the street. It's changed.
Sure.
So that would be totally unnecessary in today's world. But at the time we thought it was. And I can't remember other legislation, but I had 2 or 3 bills that dealt with health and or safety.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the restrictions on drivers, I did read a little bit about that, and it was restrictions on drivers for minors. I guess trying to prevent accidents among young people. Was that the idea?
This that I introduced that didn't pass?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the juvenile brain does not mature until about age 27. And we were giving people full-fledged licenses at 16.
Okay.
Which didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. So I said it ought to be probationary until 21.
Right.
Not 27, but till 21. The license ought to be probationary, in which case the penalty for doing the wrong stuff would have cost them loss of license.
Right.
I didn't pass that.
Okay.
But that was one of them. And then another one that I suggested at the time was that people over the age of 80 ought to have to take another driver's test.
Yeah.
I didn't pass that one either. And now that I'm 85, I don't think I'm very well about that one.
Well, things change, I guess. Yeah. So when you were a rookie politician, did you have any national political heroes or local state political heroes? People that you looked
I
up
liked
to?
Reagan.
Okay.
I guess he was as much of a hero as anybody. I was pretty conservative at the time. I wasn't a member, but I was interested in the Young Americans for Freedom, the National Young Republican Organization.
Right.
And so I liked Bill Buckley. I listened a lot to and I remember Kennedy. I liked Kennedy a lot.
Yeah.
And even though he was of a different political party, when I was an intern in Philadelphia was when he defeated Nixon, and I remember being a Nixon supporter and staying up at the apartment of the girl I was dating at that time until like 4 a.m, waiting to find out who won the darned election.
Wow.
But watching him over his career, I was really very impressed with him and his dedication to the country and what it could be. And I would probably have voted for Bobby had he survived 68. So I wasn't strictly just Republican. I was more interested in what people wanted to do,
Sure.
and how they wanted to do it, than I was in the party. The party was, and it's even less important to me now. I really resent what's happened in the country in terms of total party polarization. Party should not be first. Government should be first.
Right.
And party is just a tool to helping good people get elected.
Yeah.
Well, if the parties aren't making an effort to recruit good people and supporting them in a broad sense to make good judgments, then there's something wrong with the parties. And I have major problems with both political parties right now.
Yeah.
I tried in the last presidential election very hard to get the Libertarian Party into the debates because I don't agree with a lot of what they believe, but I just believe that another voice is important in the discussion. And I wrote a lot of people about it. One of them was Mitch Daniels, who was on the debate commission, and he said he would try to do that himself, but he was unsuccessful in adding them to the debate. The country is not well served unless it hears more voices.
Sure.
And people in both parties say, well, if you run X, Y, Z, you'll subtract from this party.
Right.
You know, so then you'll get it to the other party.
Yeah.
Well, there is some of that, but it's high time we start allowing more voices to be heard and more visions to be considered.
Yeah.
We're really, really polarized and very narrow in our thinking right now. I'm in the middle of a project. I don't really know about this or not, but or even care about it.
Well, that'd be interesting.
But I recruited about 130 people to help me write a series of papers on major issues facing the country. We got 21 topic areas, and we're about 2/3 of the way through. It's been going on almost 2 years.
Interesting. Okay.
So I subscribe to a lot of the foundations and think tanks, and as they come out with papers in some different areas, I take those and I extract them and I file them, and then we're writing papers on those different areas, and one of which is government and elections. And there is a lot that needs to be changed if we're going to get to the place where we're truly represented. My son is really concerned about the Senate, with having 2 senators from each Senate, from each state, and he said that 70% of the people are going to be living in 15 states, which means the other, however, 15 from 51, what is that, 26 states, are going to only have 30% of the people, but they'll have 60% of the Senate.
Yeah.
And that really bothers him. And I understand that. The problem is that the founders, one of their major points, and a lot of compromises in the founding, as you're well aware, but one of their major talking points was protecting the minority from the tyranny of the majority. And that's Edmund Burke. You know, Edmund Burke said, it's no more right for the majority to force its will on the minority than it is for the minority, had they the votes, to force their will on the majority. And so there's a lot that needs to be changed. Money has got too big. I mean, there's a lot across that. But that's what we're trying to do, is to try to look at all these issues and say, there are arguments on a lot of these sides. How do we come to consensus? And the goal with this, whether it's a book or a series of papers or whatever, I don't care. The goal is to have a series of town halls across the country on these subjects, using this material as a platform.
Yeah.
People can do some reading ahead advice. People on the stage can read it ahead. The people who are going to come and listen or watch on television will have the material to read and think about ahead of time.
Right.
And to have a national dialogue that's a real dialogue.
Yeah.
We don't have it now. We just throw rocks at each other. And,
Sure.
So that's the goal, and that's what I'm working on.
That's pretty noble. So it sounds like you're really trying to heal the divide as much as you can.
Well, I'm trying.
Yeah.
God knows. There's a group called the Stanley K. Lacey Leadership Group. Do you know anything about that?
No.
It's they select people from various businesses around the city, young rising people in those companies, to come together, and there's a year-long program where they hear from various speakers about various issues confronting the community and opportunities and what have you. And they have then they go back to whatever they're doing, but they become oriented to their community and more able to be participating and bring their companies into participation in the community. And a group of us, you know anything about the city committee?
A little bit.
Well, the city committee was formed, I don't know, 70s sometime, and we were a group of people who were, it was never formal. We had no constitution, bylaws, or anything else. We did not elect any officers. We just met together on a regular basis to see what we could be doing about certain issues. We went around to leaders in the community, business people and others, and asked them and polled them, what are the things that bother you most? What are the opportunities you see that we're not addressing appropriately? And then we came back together and we put together things to try to accomplish all of that.
Sure.
So anyway, some of us from the city committee were asked to address the leadership alumni from this Stanley K. leadership thing at one of their get-togethers. And at the close of that, the moderator said, "Okay, are there any last things that any of you would like to say before we adjourn? Make one last statement." So they went down the line, and I was the last one. And my comment was, dream no small dreams, make no small plans.
Sure.
And if I'm going to say that, I think I have to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's what I'm doing now. I may not live long enough. God knows a lot of my friends are dead or dying. But that's the goal. And I've talked to Brian Payne at the Indianapolis Foundation, and he thinks that there are 49 community foundations that would be willing to sponsor a town hall.
Right.
And I talked to the people at public television here, WFYI, and I said, I think PBS ought to broadcast these things if we have them. And he said, I think that's a possibility. Let us see what you got when you get a little closer to it. So
interesting. That's
the goal. I want the country to start thinking and talking rationally instead of emotionally.
Sure. That's a noble goal. It's certainly pretty stressful times for a lot of people.
It is. It's. I think I may have bitten off too much, but I've got. Sometimes I have an article that'll come from one of these places. It'll take me 3 days to work through the article and get it down to something I can use.
Right.
Well, I've got hundreds of articles.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I worry about the time. I've just put myself on a schedule, and I have to do 5 articles a day if I'm going to maintain any kind of a schedule.
Right.
So I'm pounding myself now, and if it means staying up till 2 or 3, I'll stay up till 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But I got to get my 5 a day done.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's impressive. Really is. Interesting.
It's fun. And I'm learning so much.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's. Yeah. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, we elect people who don't know anything.
Well, that's the fear, yeah.
One of the things I got an email from a friend yesterday who's an economist, a former professor at IU, and he was talking about the Indiana General Assembly and some of the dumb stuff that they do or try to do. And I wrote back and I said, just remember that the Indiana General Assembly is far more representative of the general public than we would like for it to be.
Interesting.
And he wrote back and he said, if that's the case, then we ought to just put a sign at all of our state borders that said, forgo all hope, all ye who enter here. And I wrote back and I said, no, but it does put a damper on optimism.
Sure.
I mean, there is a problem. People have an emotional interest in something, and they run and they get elected because they seem to be a nice guy or a nice girl. And then they're there. And I never forget my experience. It was a truly representative body. There were smart people and dumb people. There were hard workers and lazy people. There were honest people and dishonest people. It was a fascinating experience.
Interesting.
But you worry about what comes out of that kind of a thing. So if you can put together a public that is better informed, more thoughtful, and more interested in good government,
Mm-hmm.
and we got to teach it better in schools too. That'll be in one of these papers. But
Sure.
Maybe we can get to a better place.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. I think we're a country that is an experiment, and we're still experimenting.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's that seems clearly the case. It's an ongoing process. So. Wow. Okay. Well, that's really, really good. It's interesting. Very, very interesting. So yeah, I guess going back now to.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I
get way off your subject. I'm sorry.
This is no. That's good. I mean, the more things you share, I mean, the more interesting it's going to be for people and people listening and reflecting on this history. So, so when you were running your campaign, did you have a particular campaign strategy at all, or?
No, we had an excellent Republican organization in Marion County.
Okay.
Keith Bulin was the county chairman, a lawyer here in town, terribly able, very, very dedicated to good government, more interested in good government than anything else, and he was an enormously gifted organizer and motivator.
Mm-hmm.
So we went around and we got all these precinct committeemen. Well, then we'd have county conventions, and he and others would inform and encourage all of that. So it wasn't just a central group making a decision. It was shared with the county as a whole. I don't know what your question was now, but
I was asking if you had a campaign strategy.
They had the campaign strategy.
Right, they did.
And the strategy was to have at every precinct level people who were active in the organization,
right,
who knew what was going on and would be supportive and have input. I
Sure.
mean, and those of us who were elected went to the Township Republican Club meetings to talk about issues that we were addressing and to get their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
We had a young Republican organization that had become a real Republican organization, and
Right.
we had social events, but they were also political events. So it was a really broad-based consortium of people.
Yeah.
And that was the strategy. The strategy was every precinct person is given as much support as that person needs to get people to the polls and make sure they're informed and make sure they're voting right.
Sure.
And they did, and we continued to get elected.
Yeah. Okay. And who was your main opponent at the time?
Well, it was the party.
Just the party.
Yeah, because we started out in the House,
Right.
eight people at large.
Yeah.
That later became 3-member districts.
Right.
And then finally single-member districts.
Yeah.
Not long before I left. And that changed the dynamics a lot.
Sure.
But nevertheless, you still had a good county organization, and so you went to your township
Right.
organizations. I remember in the early days when we were at large during the general election, I lived down in 41st and Washington Boulevard, and the Greek church right across the street had the Greek festival every year. And the same weekend as the Greek festival, I was assigned to go down to southern Marion County and go to the county fair and something else down way out of my district, or way out of we were at large, so it was all my district, but out of my area of influence.
Right.
And I thought, that's really dumb, but that's the way it was.
Yeah.
We ran at large, and we worked with the organizations all around the county, and the county organization did the election.
Right.
They were the reason we won.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Very good. So, what was your first election day like, and how did it feel?
Oh dear, now that's way back. I don't even remember whether it was my first election or a later election, but we would go poll to poll, just to check in with the workers who were there and thank them for their time and their effort, give them encouragement. And I don't remember whether this was that one, but it was either the first or the second, I think, election. I went to one polling place, and the first little area of tables was the Democrats. and they thought I was Andy Jacobs.
Oh, okay.
And they were all over me. Andy Jacobs was a congressman, and thank you, Andy, and all that sort of thing. You know, I didn't deceive them at all. Or relieve them of that impression at all, but just said thank you and all of that. Then went down and talked to the Republicans. So I remember that. I remember that part of the election day, and I remember, and I think it was a later election. I went into the firehouse at 56th and Illinois, shaking hands with the firemen, and I went into the back area where they sleep, and there were desks there, and I saw on one of the desks a list of people not to vote for. I was one of them.
Oh no!
I figured I must be doing something right.
Yeah. So. And so, how did your feelings change after each reelection? Did you have any sort of different mentality about?
No, number one, this was not my life. You know, it was a terribly important part of my life.
Right.
But I practiced medicine, so
that's
the main thing that I was oriented to, and I was having children, which is another major orientation. I don't think I changed at all. I just looked at it as another opportunity to go do what needed to be done. In one of my elections, I went to bed thinking I'd lost, because that's what the polls looked like. Well, the next morning I found out that wasn't the case. In one of my early elections, it was not very early. It was when we were 3-member districts, but the first time we were a 3-member district, I remember writing to the guys that ran on the Democrat Party and saying, I know you ran because you were concerned about our community, and I want to represent you. And if there are things that you would like to see done, please let me know so I can do them. And that was kind of my approach to politics. It was never, in my time in the legislature, we always said politics is 10%. Governing is 90%. And I co-sponsored a lot of legislation with Democrats.
Yeah.
And Dick Bodine and I, who was the minority leader, together worked out the Indiana Plan for Medical Education, which is the 7 centers around the state. And he was, theoretically a political opponent, but I never looked at it that way, and I don't think he looked at it that way.
Yeah.
We were both there to do work.
Sure.
What did you ask me?
I was just talking about how your feelings of being elected changed over time after.
They didn't change. It was always.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting to me, I said at the time, and I still think it's kind of interesting. In August, you really didn't remember what it was that was very important, and you couldn't think of things that really had to be done.
Right.
But nevertheless, you knew you were going back. Come the middle of, say, February, you'd bleed and die for those things that you were working on.
Sure.
And I've always thought that was really, really interesting. It's just an observation, but it's how we can emotionally attach ourselves to something.
Right. Yeah.
And it's I think it's part of the American competitive arrangement. We really like our home team, and we're really discouraged if they lose. And we had nothing to do with putting the team together, with how they performed, and we're not affected by their loss. But nevertheless, we take that on.
Right.
And I think that's similar to what happens to an elected person. That people come to him and they start getting interested in and recognizing and personally, emotionally invested in.
Sure.
In accomplishing whatever it is they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's response to
that's a good assessment. That is interesting. Now, talking about the General Assembly and what was going on there, what were you thinking when you walked into the State House for the first day of the legislative session?
Oh, I was terribly impressed.
Yeah.
I don't know. there is a real, I don't know, it's a sense of awe. It's a burden of responsibility. It's all of those things. That, and I don't think I lost that over the years.
Right.
You walk into that building, and it's a different place. It's a shrine to democracy, and it's. I got to see some of the less exciting side of government and politics, but nevertheless, I maintain and still maintain a high degree of respect for and humility in the presence of the facility and the process that goes on there.
Yeah, that's good. And did the legislative process meet your expectations, or did it exceed your expectations?
I don't know that I had any expectations.
Okay.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
My first year there, a fellow who had been speaker from Marion County in the past, Dick Guthrie, gave us a little orientation session because all of us were freshmen. We'd never been, none of us had ever been there before.
Sure.
And about how to behave and what to do and all that. Well, one of the things he told us was, if you've got a bill in there and it's assigned to a committee, always go to the chairman and ask for a hearing on your bill. So I had a bill, I can't remember what it was. And it was in, I think, the Ways and Means Committee, and John Coppice was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And I went to John and I asked him for a hearing on my bill, and he said, fine. So we had the hearing, and I had all my witnesses to give their testimony and all the rest of it. And the end of the meeting came, and he moved to adjourn, and I said, John, when are we going to vote on the bill? He says, I promised you a hearing. I didn't promise you a vote. Which taught me a lot.
Yeah.
in a very short order.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that was kind of just going through this experience helped teach you a lot about the ins and outs of state government. And
Absolutely.
how it worked.
Absolutely. I mean, you're always learning. If you're not always learning, you're dead. You know, it's and you're learning about the facts of the issues, but you're also learning about how to deal with people, how best to get where you want to go.
Right.
You know, and maybe you learn it well enough, and maybe you don't. I thought I had gotten pretty good at it, but then I got to be the majority leader, and that was fine. Then I ran for speaker, and I got beat. Well, that's because I didn't do some things I should have done.
Okay.
And I learned some of my lessons too late.
Right.
But,
yeah. Okay. Did you have any political mentors once you got settled into the General Assembly?
Well, Bill Ruckelshaus,
Okay.
who knew more about what was going on, he was majority leader our freshman year.
Yeah.
Was one. Keith Bulin, who had served previously and was our county chairman, was one. Bert Servas was one, who was the chair of the city county council, or not city council, and then city county council. John Burkhart. And those were, I guess, the mentors.
Yeah.
I would guess that they were the mentors.
Okay, sure. And so in the General Assembly, how did you know the needs and wants of your constituents?
Well, we went out to talk to them. We went to the township meetings. We made ourselves available by phone and by letter. Mostly, and we went during the election time. We would go around to various precincts and go door to door with the precinct committeemen. So they knew us and we knew them, and that was pretty much how we.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How we heard it, and you know, and then there were the lobbyists. Terribly important part of the assembly. Terribly important. You know, that you can't know everything about everything. They're a great source of information. You cannot allow them to be determinative, which I think they sometimes are, which I don't like. One of the things that has changed in the assembly, which I regret, the first year I was elected, the first first week of the first session, the lobbyist for the Restaurant Association and the state chairman of the Republican Party invited me to dinner. And we had dinner down at King Cole Restaurant, and then they said, we're going to show you how to be a good legislator, a successful legislator. So we left and we went over to the hotels, the Lincoln and the what was the other one? Can't remember the name of the other one. And went around to what were called hospitality suites. A hospitality suite was a hotel room with a bar that was rented by a lobbying organization, whether it be the truckers or the teachers or the REMCs or whoever it was. Each one was a different place, and the host was there, who was the lobbyist, but mainly just to provide availability. They did not hassle you. They did not push you at all. If you had questions about something that they were interested in, you could ask them and they would give you the information. But mainly it was a chance for Democrats and Republicans to go and talk with each other, and if there were specific issues they needed to discuss them. That's where Bodine and I worked out the medical plan. Those were terribly important. And they were terribly important in Washington, and there's a loss in Washington just as there's a loss here. The people who don't know anything about the legislative process but want it to be fair, didn't like the hospitality suites. It was too much access for the lobbyists. The lobbyists are bad people. You know, they're all self-interested and they're awful people. Not so. I mean, they really did not try to talk to you about their issues. If you wanted to talk about the issues, they were there to provide information. But the big deal was Republicans and Democrats were together in a social setting, getting to know one another, not necessarily talking legislative stuff, talking about other things, talking about families, talking about sports, whatever. And as a result, that was reflected in the functioning of the assembly, because you didn't take out after other people. You knew who they were. You knew that your goals were similar to your goals. They may have a different way of getting there, but we were collegial, and that was a positive thing. Same thing in Washington. There was a time when the legislators didn't spend 80 hours a day on the phone trying to raise money. They did have social events. They didn't live in Washington. They might have an apartment in Washington, but they went home on the weekends. But they also had social events in the evenings in Washington where the two parties were both there and they talked. That didn't happen anymore. And I think those are both losses for the process, because they don't open eyes to other ways of thinking. And from people that you respect, even though you differ. That's an important part of the process, and it's gone, and I think that's a loss.
That's really interesting. You might have mentioned this already, but what was the first bill that you ever sponsored in the General Assembly?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
I don't know. First, I have no idea. I know that it had to do with. It may have been the kids driving. I really don't know. My orientation the first session was safety and health, and I just don't remember.
Sure. Okay. No problem. And what were the regular interactions like amongst members of the General Assembly, formal and informal?
They were good. I mean, we would go to lunch together. Bipartisan groups would go to lunch together every day somewhere, Block's Tea Room or Ayers Tea Room or someplace. And and then we had in the evenings, various organizations, Lilly and others, would have receptions, and we would see each other at the receptions. And so we had really good, as I said earlier, collegial relationships with one another, unlike it is today. But I mean, a little like it would be in an office. You know, If you're working for a company and you've got 10 or 15 people in a room, all in their separate cubicles, all doing stuff separately,
right,
but they still go to the break room together, and
right,
they may go out to lunch together, and
Yep.
they care about each other's families, and
yeah.
and it was like that.
So the political parties mix very well, and
Very well,
yeah.
very well. We really did say that only 10% of this is political, and
Yeah.
each party decided what it was going to try to make its political point,
Sure.
and then did it.
Yeah.
I guess one of my toughest times was when Vance Hartke died, and as majority leader, I had to eulogize him.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't think a whole lot of Vance Hartke as a senator.
Okay.
But I tried the best I could to
Yeah.
be fair and
Sure.
and positive.
Wow. Okay.
Same thing with Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah.
They were the different party, but
Yeah.
but people who are willing to give part of their life to public service have to be admired for that. I mean,
Right.
they do it for all kinds of reasons. Some of them because they really want good government. Some of them because they've got an ego that just doesn't stop. There are all kinds of reasons why people do it, but it's not. It is a sacrifice.
Sure.
For most people. There are some people whose professions might be helped. I guess there are lawyers who might be helped some by it.
Right.
But by and large, it's a service, and we ought to admire and respect and appreciate the service.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. Did you remember any differences, if at all, between the House and the Senate in terms of how they?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
What bothered me a lot was that the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans never talked to each other.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I thought that didn't make any sense. We ought to jointly know where we're headed and what we're going to be doing. And
Yeah.
you could pass a bill in the House that was, you thought, perfectly good bill, and you sent it to have a good sponsor in the Senate,
Sure.
and it wouldn't even be heard.
Yeah.
And our positions politically were not necessarily meshed because we never really talked to each other. That really bothered me a
Yeah.
whole lot. Because in Marion County, we did.
Right. Right.
We were very used to meeting Senate and House people together, coming
Yeah.
to consensus about goals and all the rest of it. Didn't happen at the state level. And
That's
that,
interesting.
that bothered me.
Huh. Wow. Do you remember much about your seatmate at all in the General Assembly?
Well, I had
I know you must have had several
16
different
of them.
Yeah. Was there any particular
No.
one that you remember well, or?
Well, but not for any particular
Yeah,
reason.
okay.
I mean, Thames Mosey, who was from up in northern Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
was a seatmate, and I liked Thames. Janice Crimmins from Marion was a gal, and so we got along fine together. I don't.
Yeah. No, that's totally fine. Could you talk about the process for generating a bill and what that was like for you?
Well, there are a couple of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are at least three different ways. One is you have an idea in your own head that you want to have, that you want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
My only story about that is one time going to the Legislative Services Agency, which we called at that time the Legislative Council,
Mm-hmm.
and asking for something to happen in a bill. And the guy looked up and he said, "We can't do that." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "That's against the law." And I said, "Do you understand what it is we do here?"
Mm-hmm.
I remember that vividly. But one is your own idea of what you'd like to see accomplished, like Minigov. I mean, that was mine. Secondly is bills that somebody brings to you.
Mm-hmm.
And all the lobbyists out there can't pass a bill by themselves. They have
Right.
to find a sponsor, so they go and find somebody. And
Sure.
clearly the medical people would come to me because of my background.
Right. Right.
So I carried legislation for others, and then third was political bills that the parties
Mm-hmm.
that you had decided we want to accomplish as an organization. Who's going to take this one? Who's going to take that one? and spread those around and pass those around.
Yeah.
So there are three ways that the bills come into your hands.
Right. Okay. What roles did party leadership play in legislation? Were they
Well-defined leadership?
I guess like for,
not non-member leaders, or
no, like member leaders, like the Speaker of the House, or did they have a big impact on legislation?
yeah, if they didn't like it,
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
it would go into the safe, and you'd never see it again.
It's gone. Yeah.
When we passed Unigov, this is an accurate story. Governor Bowen, or not, it wasn't Governor, Speaker Bowen at that time, wanted to be governor, and he had not received the kind of support from Marion County that he felt he deserved.
Okay.
So he was very slow to hand down the Unigov bill. And we began to wonder if it was ever going to come down. And so I think he wanted Marion County to go to him and make a deal for the county convention for him to become governor as part of the price for passing Unigov. And so it wasn't moving, so I don't know whether the mayor called me or I called the mayor. But anyway, in our conversation, I said, I think you need to show the speaker that the public is really supportive of that, and why don't you call him and talk to him about it? So I gave him the speaker's private phone number. Well, Dick, to his credit, apparently we didn't communicate well enough, because he went in front of the press and said, the speaker wants to know that you all are supportive of this. Everybody call this number. So people from all over Marion County were calling for and against Unigov to the speaker's office on his private line.
Oh my gosh.
And that did not endear him.
I bet.
Endear us to him. I think finally either Keith or Dick had a conversation with him and got that ironed out. So the last day that it was eligible for reading, it came down.
Yeah.
But,
interesting. Okay. Did you have a sense of how people would vote prior to actually voting?
Sometimes. I mean, you want to try to get a count. You want to get as close as you can. You can't count 100 people, but you go to certain people that you thought were influential in various groups. I remember there was one Democrat representative that the saying went, if you want his vote, sit down next to him when the ballot is cast, because he won't vote against you.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and we always got his vote. And there are different ways that you do that. You don't know, though. I used to say, and I still think it's probably accurate, the real fun in the legislature is not passing a bill 70-5. The real fun in the legislature is passing 152-48, because then you worked at it,
right? And
then it was a tough bill, and it needed support. So you didn't always know, but you had to do the work. I mean, that was part of it. You knew who was influential with whom and who to talk to and who had interest in a particular area. I mean, it's part of that social dialogue that you got at the hospitality suites.
Right.
You learned a lot there about where your problems were and what your opportunities were, that you would then pursue over the next day or two or whatever it was until your bill was called down.
Yeah.
So you didn't know the outcomes. I mean, there were some bills you knew the outcome. You knew it was going to be 78-0 or 85-0 or something. But those weren't the fun bills.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. What was a time, I guess, well, you already talked about this, but how often would you say that you had to get the other side's support to get legislation done? Was this a regular thing that you always needed to be able to work with Democrats to get bills passed? Or were there times that you could just run it through your party and still be able to get it passed?
Well, Unigov we had to do with our party.
Yeah.
We weren't going to get Democrat support for that.
Yeah.
most of the time, again, the social stuff, most of the time, you simply tried to get support from people on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
Not because you're not trying to get the whole Democrats or the whole Republicans, but trying to get enough people that from both sides that it would be clear that it was not a partisan issue, and that there were a number of people. You're working 100 people. You cannot go to everybody on every bill.
Of course.
And so you selectively try. I can't think of any time we actually went to the other party per se. Asked them in their caucus to help to support us with something. I don't know that ever happened.
Yeah. Okay.
You did go to your caucus,
right?
I mean, if you had anything that was controversial, you did talk to your caucus about getting support for it.
Yeah, makes sense. Shifting gears a little bit, what would you say the public doesn't know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
Well, again, you have to define public.
Yeah, I guess the average person.
There is no average person.
I suppose, yeah.
I guess the man on the street just knows that it exists.
Right.
And he knows that it passes laws.
Okay.
Most of those don't affect him. He doesn't think much about it. He doesn't read much about it in the paper, even though it's there. And he just assumes things will go on.
Right.
I think if you want the average man on the street, that's where they are. What happens in the General Assembly is not on their radar.
Sure.
Those who have a specific issue they're concerned about, but that's not the average man on the street.
Yeah. Did your I guess actually we talked about your legislative service. It didn't appear to have much of an impact on your family life, since it was only part of your life.
Well, it had an impact. I mean, it's clear that my family knew what I was doing.
Right, of course.
My folks lived with us.
Yeah. Okay.
In their last years, and I remember my dad looking over at me once and saying, "Why do you do what you do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Why do you serve in the legislature?" And I said, "Because I think these are important issues, important for our country, and I think good people need to be there to help them make good decisions." He looked at me and said, "When they're through with you, they'll chew you up and spit you out so fast you won't know what hit you." Well, interestingly enough, after I lost the speakership, I announced my retirement in February. Yeah. In May was going to be the county convention. Okay. Clearly, I was in my seat until my successor was elected and qualified. Right. Is the words, which was not going to be until November. But the May the county convention was in May, and always before, I'd been at the county convention and I'm sitting on the podium with everybody, all the other elected officials. I wasn't even invited. Wow. So my dad's words rang a bell with me. Yeah. That's interesting. What can you do for me today? Yeah, yeah. Wow. Jeez. In terms of legislation work, what were the most controversial legislative issues during your time in the Assembly? Obviously, Unigov was probably a major one. Were there any others? Yeah, but I can't remember. Okay. I mean, there were major issues nearly every session, but sure. But out of 16 sessions, I can't. That's a lot. Yeah. Can't go back and do any of that. For almost every bill has somebody that wants it more than anything in the world. And which ones of those would rise to the level of major issues, I can't tell you. No, that's fair. Yeah. What legislation did you work hardest on? I don't remember working any harder or less hard on anything. Okay. It's like if you're if you're the bricklayer on a house,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody asks you which side of the house did you lay bricks harder than the other side,
right,
it would be hard to tell you.
Yeah.
And you know, the work was the work.
Yeah.
And it regardless of the issue, you worked at it. And
Sure.
if it was your bill, you worked harder.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a bill you were interested in, you still worked, you know, to let people know you were supportive and what can I do to help. And it's a job. You do the whole job. You don't do pieces of the job.
Right.
So I can't tell you.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
Probably Unigov.
Unigov. Yeah.
Probably that. I can't think of anything else that would rise to that level. We did a lot of good stuff. I'm proud of a lot of it, but I can't say I was the most proud of it. I mean, I think the White River Park is a real asset for our community. It was hard to pass because it was for Marion County.
Right.
And I guess one of the things I was most proud of while we were there was overcoming that bias. There is a huge anti-Indianapolis, anti-Marion County bias around the state. Mm-hmm. They think we get everything. That's they're the focal.
Right.
And we worked really, really, really hard to overcome that. And I think we did a good job of it. By the time I left, I think we were much more. You know, some of my closest people were from Allen County, Lake County, Evansville. I don't think, when I ran for speaker, all the people who had been elected previously and served with me supported me. I lost because we had a landslide and a lot of freshmen were elected, and a county chairman. Orvis Beers was the county chairman in the 2nd District, which is Fort Wayne. All the Fort Wayne people supported me. But the county chairman was also the lobbyist for the banks, the small banks around the state in the little smaller counties. And one of the issues that was big in that time was cross-county banking, which would allow a big Indianapolis bank to go in and take over a bank in Hamilton County or surrounding counties. Mm-hmm. And I opposed that, which they did. All of those small counties were strongly opposed. But I did support multi-bank holding counties so that a large bank could accrue a relationship with smaller banks in other parts of the state because we needed to accrue capital.
Right.
And if we didn't, we were going to be in trouble. Banks were getting bigger all across the country.
Sure.
And when Orvis Beers, who was the bank, apparently he went to county chairman around the state and got all the freshmen to vote against me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how I got started on this subject, but I don't remember the origin of the question.
Oh, it was just your proudest moment as a legislator.
Well, that's not my proudest moment.
Yeah, but that's okay. You already talked about it a bit, so.
Oh, well, I guess I got off on the anti-Marion County. That was part of the issue with getting the White River Park, and so I was proud of getting that done. And the answer was because the people in Indianapolis live farther from a state park than anybody in any of the rest of the state.
Yeah.
And so we ought to have one here that people could visit, which we did. There probably are others. I can't remember what they were. I'm sure there are some relative to medicine, but I can't.
Okay. Yeah.
Remember what those are. One of the big mistakes I made was that I was a strong opponent for certificate of need for hospitals. The idea was to pass a state law that said you couldn't build a new hospital unless you applied to the state and proved that in fact there was a necessity for building one there. Mm-hmm. and I opposed that because I was a free market kind of guy. I would jump on that and support that in a minute today. We are so overbuilt with hospital facilities, and that's a direct contributor to the cost of health care.
Yeah.
We have to amortize those costs, and we're amortizing way too much cost over the same number of people. I mean, it's just pure economics, and there are certain things that I've become increasingly aware of over time that the private sector doesn't work very well on, and it's time for government to have some oversight, not to interfere with private decision making, but to make sure that private decision making is not so private that it helps one person and hurts a lot of other people.
Right. Yeah.
So there were probably some medical areas that I was proud of, but I can't remember what they are.
Okay. What was committee work like for you?
It was just work. I mean, you get a bill, you try to find out as much about it as you can, and you listen to the people who testify and make a decision about whether this is a good thing to do or not a good thing to do, and then vote.
And how did you find yourself on the committees that you served on? I guess the health one makes sense since you're a doctor.
I looked through those committees, and it seems to me I was on health and public safety, and I was a chair of the affairs of Marion County for most of my time there until I became majority leader. So, that work was just work. I enjoyed the committee work and all the committees I was on, and as a chair, you try very hard to look through what people are suggesting and talk to and think about other things that need to be done in the area that you're responsible for. Yeah. And then the process goes forward. I enjoyed the committee work. It was.
Okay. Good.
It's, if you get the vote. If you don't ask for the vote, sometimes though you don't get the vote.
Yeah. What was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome during your time in office?
Time. I was trying to practice medicine and be a good legislator at the same time.
A lot to balance at once.
It was tough. If I had not had good associates at my practice, I couldn't have done it.
Sure. In your opinion, what's the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Creating a general milieu in the state that is receptive and supportive of investment and maximizes opportunity for the residents. We need business to come here. We need people to locate here. We need to be, while we're working on the development and growth side, we need also to be looking at the needs of people who are less able to take care of themselves.
Right.
We need and educate. Why am I doing this 130 people project? Because we have 21 issues that we think there are multiple considerations.
Yeah.
Take elections alone. The changes that need to occur in elections are not just one or two. There are 5 or 6 things we need to be doing.
Sure.
And that's true across the board on issues. So the goal, I think, in governing the state or in serving as a legislator is to maximize the growth and economic vitality of the state while at the same time assuring maximal opportunity for participation and benefits to its citizens.
Yeah. Yeah. How important would you say it is to work with the other party?
Oh, I think it's vital. And part of the problem is that I don't put parties as high on my list of important as I do people and issues.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with people and issues, they're not partisan.
Right.
So you need to work with other legislators, regardless of party, to accomplish goals that you think are important for the state. So it's not a party deal to me. I am really, the party served me as a tool to help me get elected and to help me be informed as I proceeded.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a philosophical bulwark or castle in which I hid in order to throw spears at another party.
Yeah.
It's
that's really interesting. Let's see, going into some specific legislation that you worked on based on some of the research I've done. I guess during your time in the legislature, there was a debate regarding the lack of merit-based promotion, lack of a merit-based promotion system in the Indianapolis Police Department. Could you describe for me what was happening at the time and what your role was in that? If you remember it.
I don't remember very well. I tell you, I do remember being opposed to allowing collective bargaining by public employees, and played a role away from the assembly in assuring that didn't happen at the time. Aside from that, we tried to be as supportive as we could to both the organized or statutory bodies and the private ones. You know, in fire protection, a major part of fire protection in Marion County was volunteer fire departments. It wasn't organized public ones. We tried to be as supportive as we could to all of those organizations. We did have some concerns back in the Unigov days of the sheriff and the police department when there was a lot of overlap, and I remember one of the things that bothered us a little bit was that sheriffs were getting rich collecting, and that seemed to be inappropriate to us. So we tried to change that. I've forgotten your question, but
no, that's fine. It was just about the merit-based promotion system, the Indianapolis Police Department.
I don't remember being actively involved in that discussion.
Okay, sure.
Did you see something in my history that suggests that?
I did see some newspaper articles about it. I couldn't tell to what extent your role wasn't, but your name was listed there. I ought to go to the newspapers.
You
should, yeah. Check out the archive at the State Library.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another piece of interesting legislation I came across was about making forced political donations unlawful. Do you remember anything about that?
Vaguely.
Okay.
It was philosophical that I thought nobody ought to have to donate to somebody that they didn't personally support. Mm-hmm. It's a little like right to work laws.
Yeah.
You know, I actually believe in worker organizations. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that somebody who doesn't want to participate ought to be forced to pay for those organizations. So it's the same kind of thing.
Sure. Okay. I noticed in regard to the topic of pollution, you once introduced a bill that would ban projects that would pollute public waters. What was happening at the time that inspired this legislation?
I have no idea.
You don't know?
No
Fair
idea.
enough.
No idea.
Then people will have to go to the newspapers for that one. Okay, that's fine.
Well, I certainly don't believe in pollution.
Yeah, that's right. Good enough. Good enough answer.
That's all I can say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let's see. Do you remember anything about a bill that you worked on that was allowing minors to get treated for sexually transmitted diseases without their parents' knowledge?
I remember that. And I think I carried that for. I don't know if it was the League of Women Voters, but some outside organization. Mm-hmm. The problem was we had a venereal disease problem, mm-hmm. and one of the issues was that a minor mm-hmm. could not be treated for sexually transmitted disease without the parent's consent.
Right.
Well, a lot of them did not want to admit to a parent, and so we were prolonging the
Right.
epidemic.
Yeah.
And I said, we can't do that. We need to allow these people to be treated.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of disclosure or family interference or anything else. It's just a matter of stopping a disease.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do remember that one.
Yeah. Okay.
And my position was that you can't legislate what a young couple is doing in their car at
Right.
2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. You also worked on legislation regarding cigarette sales to minors. Do you remember that at all?
Only vaguely.
Yeah.
I have major problems with cigarettes and now the vaping.
Mm-hmm.
They are harmful.
Yeah.
And, the question is, to what extent should government get into people's lives and keep them from hurting themselves?
Right.
And the answer is, it's same thing with motorcycle helmets. Did you see anything about that?
I didn't actually see the motorcycle helmets.
I carried a bill to require people to wear motorcycle helmets if they're on the road. Well, there are those who say, well, that's an interference with personal freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer was, fine, wear the helmet in your house and in your garage, on your motorcycle, all you want.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on a public street, that's a different deal.
Right.
We have to maintain the streets. If you get hurt, we have to supply the ambulance. We have to get you to the hospital. We have to take care of you.
Sure.
So there's a public interest in that, and
Right.
there's a public interest in you wearing your helmet.
Right.
So we passed that.
Interesting.
That law.
Okay.
And it lasted a couple of years until one of the three-party, in our three-member district, one of my fellow representatives introduced a bill to reduce the age to 21, so that if you're over 21, you could beat the hell out of your head. It didn't make any difference.
Wow. Okay.
So he repealed it, amended it down.
Yeah.
So now it's just children, basically.
Okay.
I don't know what the question was. It wasn't on helmets.
Yeah, it was
something
else.
else.
About the cigarette sales to minors.
Well, same deal.
Yeah.
Same, and it's the same deal on driving. Minors are minors, and they're minors for a reason.
Right.
Because they are not mature, their judgment is not mature, their thought process are not mature. Let's give them time to mature before we ask them to make decisions that could be harmful to their lives.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Last question regarding specific legislation. Do you remember anything about working on legislation concerning the prevention of measles?
No.
Okay.
What did it say? I did something about that?
There was a couple articles about it. It didn't go into lots of detail, but I was curious just to see.
I don't remember that. Clearly, measles are a big deal.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the issue so much in those days of vaccination.
Yeah.
But that's a major issue today.
Sure. Yeah.
And the people who don't get vaccinated put other people at risk.
Right.
There are people who, from an immunodeficiency standpoint, can't be vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take a person and put them next to them, who's chosen not to be vaccinated, he in fact can infect this person who can't be vaccinated.
Yeah.
So the more we vaccinate, the more we protect the people who don't get vaccinated.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with your question, because
I
don't remember your question.
Yeah, no, it's still relevant politically. So
Yes, it is.
So now going into almost finish here, going into your life after the General Assembly. Let's see. Could you go back over? I think you talked about this a little bit, but when you officially left the General Assembly and why?
Well, I left because I'd been there 16 years.
Yeah.
While I was also trying to practice medicine.
Yep.
And I had risen as high as I could rise in the House, and was repudiated. I lost by one vote on the third ballot.
Yeah.
And I think to a great extent I was depressed.
Mm.
I might have stayed otherwise. I've had a number of legislators in recent years come to me and apologize for not voting for me. They say they made a mistake, and it's nice to hear. It doesn't change the fact at all.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is about all of that the new speaker kept cross-county banking, that whole process, from passing for one session.
Mm.
and then it passed anyway.
Okay.
And in that period of time, Bank AFNB, which was larger than Bank One in Columbus, was acquired by Bank One.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing, we lost all of our major banks, Indiana National Bank, Merchants Bank, all of them disappeared.
Okay. Sure.
To some bank headquartered in someplace else, which, as far as I was concerned, was, see,
Right.
What did we try to tell you?
Yeah.
And it's, I don't remember your question. I get off on my points.
No, that's okay. It was just about when you left the Indiana General Assembly and why.
Well, I left for that reason. I was,
Right.
and it was hard because after 16 years, a major part of my personality was
Of course.
as a member of the assembly, and but medicine has a way of taking all the time you'll give it.
Yeah.
And so,
Sure.
I had no problem being
Yeah.
fully involved, and medicine was going through some changes at that time.
Okay.
And the year after I left the assembly, the president of the medical staff decided to have a retreat to talk about what was called, I can't remember what the name was at the time. It became managed care.
Mm-hmm.
HMOs were just starting to form, and PMOs, and nobody knew what those organizations even were. So he convened a session in the spring after I left the assembly, same year, on this subject, and brought in some people from around the country to talk about what was happening in medicine. And we decided as a medical body to form a physician medical organization, a PMO. We didn't have any idea what that was. We decided to form one, and they elected me the president of that.
Okay.
So then I became active in managed care. Ended up being medical director for 3 managed care programs.
Wow.
So there were other things that filled the void.
Sure. Yeah. Seems so.
Yeah.
So how would you summarize your time as a state legislator?
An opportunity to serve,
Mm-hmm.
and the satisfaction of feeling that I played a role in the health and future of the state.
Right.
A very minor role, but at least that I was there and I played a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. What is your favorite story or anecdote from your time as a legislator?
Well, I've given you most of them.
Okay.
I think.
I wasn't sure if you had a favorite in mind, but yeah.
No, I don't know. This is not a favorite, but I'll never forget it. On the motorcycle helmet thing, when they came back to change the bill, to change the law that we had passed, Doris Dorbecker, who was a representative from the south side of Indianapolis, was on the board of the National Kidney Foundation.
Okay.
And she said, and she had chronic kidney disease herself and ended up dying of that. But she came to me and she said, "Sorry about that, but I got to thank Bob for passing that bill because now we'll have a lot more kidneys for transplant."
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
That's just one little story.
Yeah.
Another time, one of the legislators I had served with earlier on, who had left, I don't know whether he got defeated or just retired, decided to come back.
Yeah.
But he'd been bald when he left, and he was in the hall and he had a toupee.
Mm.
And I saw him the first time, and he smiled at me and said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi, I think I used to serve with your father." Which he got a good kick out of.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy. He when I ran for speaker, he flew me around the state. He was a private pilot.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was a big help.
Yeah. Let's see. What lessons, if any, did you learn as a legislator?
Always to look behind the position to the motive.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand why somebody is taking the position that they're taking, you probably can't change their position.
Right.
I think that may be the main lesson. And the other lesson is to listen yourself.
Mm-hmm.
To always question whether you're right or wrong and be willing to change if somebody has a better answer to an issue than you have.
Sure.
I think listening and being true to your values are probably the big thing.
What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Oh, just that. Don't come in thinking you're God.
Right.
Be humble.
Mm-hmm.
Listen. You're a servant, and servants have an obligation to the people they serve.
Mm-hmm.
So, listen and learn, and always recognize that there's more than one way of looking at an issue, and try your best to understand all sides before you take a position. Ed Zigner was the reporter for the news, and in one of my early sessions, at the end of each session, Ed would, he was kind of the dean of the legislative reporters. At the end of the session, he would give a speech to a joint session, the House and the Senate, recouping what he thought he heard, and what the press thought of the session.
Okay.
And in this particular session, we had a Baptist minister from the South Side who was way over there.
Okay.
I mean, he was way over there. He wanted anybody convicted of a sexual crime to be castrated.
Oh no! Okay.
And on and on.
Okay.
I don't think he accomplished a thing while he was there.
Wow.
But Ed Zigner, in the course of his talk, that at the end of that particular session, he said, I've been thinking about something. He said, it finally occurred to me that there's nothing quite so dangerous as the man who thinks he has truth up his sleeve. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew exactly what he was saying.
Yeah.
And then he said, except the man who thinks God put it there.
Mm.
And I've never forgotten that. And everybody knew exactly who he was talking about.
Yeah.
And he didn't come back. He was only there one session. Don't remember his name.
Interesting.
But I've always liked that comment.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Okay. How has the state of Indiana changed over the course of your lifetime?
Oh, it's changed like everything else. I mean, everything is modernized.
Yeah.
Technology has occurred. I don't think I think we would say the same thing had happened in Ohio or Kentucky or Illinois. Mm-hmm. Communication has improved.
Sure.
Our financial systems are streamlined. The thing that hasn't improved is the pension system. Mm. And the unfunded liability for public pensions is going to kill us if we don't address it. Mm. Illinois is already in major trouble over it. And we've got to deal with it. We've got an obligation to these people. We've contractually agreed that we're going to pay them this money. We don't have the money. Mm. So what do you do?
Yeah.
So so Indiana is not any different from any place else, but that has become a terribly important issue that people are still not addressing.
Sure.
But the main thing is society is modernized. We're not the same in 2020 as we were in 1967.
Right. Okay. How has the General Assembly changed?
I think it's less collegial.
Okay.
By a long shot.
Yeah.
More political. Probably less responsive to the general public.
Okay. More
responsive to politics and special interests. And I say that as a person who doesn't spend a lot of time down there, so it's a poorly informed statement.
Okay.
And I will acknowledge that I don't claim to have expertise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What, if any, enduring qualities do Hoosiers still have or hold dear?
Hoosiers generally, I think, are really friendly people. And I think and I can't say that we're different from other people. Mm-hmm. If I were a legislator in Kentucky, I might say the same thing. But but I think Hoosiers tend to care about people.
Okay.
And and they're friendly. I think there is, as with the rest of the country, there is more polarization now than there ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in contrast to what I think is the basic Hoosier personality.
Right.
I think Hoosiers generally tend to be compassionate and friendly
Mm-hmm.
and tolerant, but that's not what we're seeing in a lot of our political dialogue these days.
Okay. Yeah.
And that bothers me a whole lot.
Sure.
And it's specifically what I'm trying to address with my work.
Right. Of course. Last question. What do you want Hoosiers to know about their role in relation to the function of the Indiana General Assembly?
It's theirs, and it'll be whatever they want it to be if they in fact want to have an influence. There are those who care enough to form organized positions on certain issues.
Right.
And more power to them. The General Assembly is there to listen and respond to the needs of its citizens. And if the citizens recognize that and think about how things could be better and organize to try to make them better, the General Assembly will ultimately respond.
Mm-hmm.
Its ability to respond will be compromised by politics.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add, or anything that we didn't talk about?
We talked about a lot more than I ever thought we would talk about.
Fair enough. Okay, well, thank you so much for doing this.
I need to get a pen.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll get these turned off here. And